So, for the first time in my entire life, I am actually reading the Bible cover to cover. Well, not literally, because I'm listening to an audiobook. It's the NIV version narrated by David Suchet. I guess that's how you pronounce his last name. But I mean, he has a pretty good voice, and honestly, with a book this long, it's really important that you get somebody who has a good voice and not somebody who just like mumbles or has a thick accent or anything like that. Um Now, in the interest of being totally honest, I will say like I grew up in a very Christian household. I attended church as a kid along with my family. I have sometimes attended church on my own sporadically as an adult, but I'd say definitely not anywhere close to the majority of the time. In terms of where my own personal beliefs lie, I mean, it's a subject I haven't really talked about much on this channel, and very deliberately so, because I find it can just alienate people a lot. Like, if I'm too Christian or not Christian enough, or the wrong denomination of Christian, or what have you, it's gonna piss somebody off one way or another. So that's kind of why I've avoided the subject, aside from just acknowledging the basic fact that like Christianity is an integral part of Western civilization. But beyond that, I haven't gone into much detail about my specific beliefs. Without going too far into it, because this gets into some serious schizo territory, but let's just say I do have some reason from personal experience to believe that there is more to reality than science can explain, or that, like, let me put it this way. I've had things happen in my life that are just such extremely improbable alleged coincidences that seem to have meaning, that it's like it gets to a certain point where it's like something can be so improbable and so laden with meaning that it's like, okay, I mean, sure, it could be a coincidence, but I it's hard to believe. Let me put it that way. So I've had things like that happen in my life. I don't want to go into detail about them because frankly, it would involve talking about some very weird shit, and also about specific circumstances that would potentially dox me. But yeah, like, suffice it to say, I've had some weird experiences involving extremely improbable coincidences that, could be interpreted as supernatural in nature. Have I ever seen anything definitively supernatural, like an object moving obviously by itself, or anything like that that is like completely scientifically inexplicable? No. Um that said, okay, like, my own faith, definitely it stands on somewhat shaky ground. Like, I waver in whether in like the extent to which I feel I believe in the Bible, simply because while I do feel strongly there's more to reality than what is typically explainable by science, I also feel that, like, I guess there's certain aspects of Christianity I find it hard to wrap my head around on a moral level. Now, that's not to say every aspect of Christianity. There's a lot that I agree with, but there's some things that I find it hard to wrap my head around. That being said, I do strongly I would say I desire the Bible to be true. Like, I desire for there to be a God and for the Bible to be true, but there are nonetheless certain things that I maybe have a hard time wrapping my head around. But I guess, yeah, to quote Mulder from the X-Files, I want to believe. And sometimes I feel I really do. A lot of the time I feel I do, but then other times I feel doubt, So I don't know what you'd call me. Like, I haven't been to church in quite a while, but I did used to go quite a lot. The funny thing is, though, I would say when I went, if anything, my belief might have been actually shakier then than it is now, despite the fact that I haven't gone to church in a while. But that's probably just because I was an edgy teenager back then. But anyway, I guess my point is, Okay, that's enough about me. That's enough preamble. I just want to get into context here because I don't want to be like false advertising or anything, like acting like I am a devout Christian who has, a very strong sense of faith. Like I would say at best I have a shaky sense of faith, but some sense. And yeah, I'll say though, on a cultural level, I definitely prefer Christianity over the alternative. I will say that. I definitely would qualify as a cultural Christian at very least, but I want to be an actual Christian too. It's just the issue is there are some things I find it hard to wrap my head around a little bit, like on a moral level, and a few things on like maybe a practical level also. But enough about that. Like, I'm just trying to say this to put things into context because I don't want to be bullshitting or lying to anyone here. But anyway, enough about that. Okay. I just finished today. Okay, so I'm reading through the Bible for the first time in my life. And I just finished the Old Testament today in the audiobook. So what I want to do is I want to provide a bit of a guide for people who were kind of in the same boat I was, where I had an interest in reading the Bible, but I've been putting it off forever simply because of how big the book is, how long it is. It is very big, very long. It's not the easiest book to get through in terms of just sheer size. That being said, one thing that pleasantly surprised me is, at least with the NIV version, it was easier to understand than I expected. I expected to really get lost in large portions and have no idea what's going on or what's being talked about, to just be very confused, find it hard to follow. I didn't find that almost at all. There was only one brief section that I felt that way about, which was, I think it might have been the book of Judges or something like that, like some section that kind of went into it almost became kind of poetic or something like that. I think it was just one or two chapters, and it was a relatively brief section, but that was the only section where I really felt a bit lost. Like I couldn't quite grasp what was being said. But that was the only part where I really felt that way. It was just like a chapter or two out of, I think it was in Judges. It was like where it started getting really poetic. It was like, I forget exactly what it was, like a prayer or like a just more poetic sounding section. But yeah, it's just, okay, brief section, but the vast majority, like 99 point whatever percent, is actually pretty comprehensible. And again, this is the NIV, the audiobook. So I personally would not recommend trying with one of the versions in archaic English, like the King James version. First time I tried was with the King James version. I didn't get very far, and I started with the New Testament. This time I'm actually starting with the Old. I'm doing it chronologically. And yes, this is the Protestant version. So I finished the Protestant books of the Old Testament. However, I do intend on reading the Catholic books afterward. I actually did read the parts, the additions to Esther and Daniel, the Catholic editions. I did. So I do intend on getting to the Catholic books and the Eastern Orthodox books, not the Ethiopian ones like Book of Enoch. That's a bit far out for me. It's a bit of a tall order, but the Eastern Orthodox ones, yes, eventually. And that'll be a separate video. And the New Testament will also be a separate video. But right now I'm talking about the Old Testament, which is the vast majority of the Bible, over 75%. So yeah, starting at the beginning, I'm going to talk about basically my opinion on, if you're somebody who, like me, was in the position where you felt reading the Bible is a very daunting task. I'm going to basically say what I think are the most important books that you should definitely read. Now, I think it's better to read the entire Bible. Absolutely. That is what I recommend. But I understand some people just feel they don't have the time for it, and they just feel they're putting it off for that reason. And I guess for people like that, that's really who I'm directing this to. And if you're somebody who feels that you do have the time to read the whole Bible, then yes, I would say read the whole Bible. That's my recommendation. But if you're somebody who absolutely feels you don't have the time for it and you want to essentially at least start with the highlights or just read the highlights, maybe later go on to the other parts, maybe not, depending on what you feel you have time for. Like, okay, if that's your situation, then that's kind of who I'm addressing here. But again, I recommend reading the whole Bible. I really do. Because it is a very important book, like whether you're religious or not, like it's important to the history of Western civilization and of mankind. But nonetheless, okay, like I get it. Not everybody has the time to read the entire Bible. And I think, a saying I like to live by is don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. And it's probably better that you read the most important parts of the Bible as opposed to reading none of it. If those are the two options. And again, like I strongly encourage read the whole Bible, but I'm saying if that's really not on the table for you, if you've absolutely made up your mind, or if you at least want to start with the parts that you view as most important, then work your way to the others. And these are what I would say are the most important parts. And keep in mind, this is something I've spoken to people who are devout Christians or seen what they've said. And a lot of them, they do agree with the fundamental principle that like there are certain parts of the Bible that are more important than others. They would say the entire Bible is important, but yes, some parts are more important. Like that is a very like, I may not be, the most devout Christian, but I've spoken to people who are very devout and also seen what they have to say. And most of them do tend to agree with the basic premise that yes, some parts of the Bible are more important than others, but all parts are important. So that being said, okay, I'm starting at the beginning. Okay, so Genesis. And again, this Bible I have here in front of me, I'm just using it as a reference. This is not what I've been reading. I've been listening to the audiobook, like I said. Okay, so Genesis, definitely an important book. In every regard. Like I made a chart actually of their importance, and the criteria I used were, there are three main criteria. Importance to the narrative, like the story of the Bible. The second is like theological / philosophical importance, like the importance to Christian theology and philosophy, or just philosophy in general. And the third was entertainment value. So like how entertaining it is. But it wasn't just a mathematical formula, because I, regardless of the score that each book got, I kind of felt like at the end of the day, it's less to do with the score, more to do with like just a general vibe, like how important is this book? But it was helpful in the process. So, okay, so reading Genesis, Genesis just scored very highly, and I would say yes, it's a very important book because it lays the foundations of the creation of the earth and a lot of important early stories in the Bible. Definitely read Genesis. Like it's a no-brainer. Like you have to read Genesis. It's not even a question. The second is Exodus. Again, the story of Moses, very important. Definitely read Exodus. It's important also philosophically because it starts getting into like the law of Moses. So definitely read Exodus. The next three might surprise you, but I'm going to say yes, definitely read Numbers. Sorry, it's Leviticus, then Numbers, then Deuteronomy. Yes, read these because yes, they contain some very boring parts, like talking about the curtains in the temple and stuff like that. Like you can definitely skim through those parts, but it's just there's so much important stuff in those books, like very important foundationally to Christianity, like the law of Moses. I can't just in good conscience say that it's not they're not crucial books to read. And like in order to parse through like the important parts, you'd have to like subdivide it like really specifically, like chapter by chapter, even verse by verse. So it would take a lot of work to do that. I would just say read the whole thing, but if you get to a part about like temple curtains and stuff like that, like you'll know it when you see it. Like the really, really boring parts, like talking about like the sin offering, like how to like slaughter the animals in detailed instructions, or like how to build the temple with like how many cubits it is or whatever, or the curtains or what have you. Those parts I would say just kind of skim. Like you don't have to necessarily read that all word for word, because yes, those parts like are very much like almost like instruction manuals that are intended like for the priests. And some of that stuff, it's like, okay, it's not as important, but it's like it's sandwiched in between some of the most important parts of the Bible. So definitely like skim those parts, but do not skip these books as a whole. Definitely do not. They're very important. Okay, next is the book of Joshua. The book of Joshua is an interesting one. Now, the book of Joshua is essentially where the Jews commit one Shoah after another, basically themselves. They take the land of Israel and they slaughter a whole lot of people. Not just the men, but the women and the children too. I hate them. Basically, yeah. It's basically one Shoah after another. This is a book that I can understand why people would find it, I hate to use the word, but problematic, because it's like there's a lot of killing of innocent people that is commanded by God, that the Jews carry out. And yeah, I mean, I'm just going to say, personally, like if you're trying to convert someone to Christianity, this is definitely not the book of the Bible that I would use. This is probably a book that like atheists and anti-theists and such would often cite as evidence from their perspective that Christianity is bad. Again, like I can accept the idea that like maybe God works in ways that I don't understand and I can't understand as a human being. But I'm not going to lie, like a lot of stuff in this book just didn't sit well with me. Like I found it hard to get through. And I don't mean so much hard to get through in terms of being boring, although it is kind of at times fairly boring, but hard to get through in the sense of like, I guess on a moral level more so, like, yeah. But I'm not trying to like condemn Christianity here. I'm just saying that like, I try to wrap my head around it. I really do. But some of the stuff in this book is just, yeah. But anyway, and I get it. Like in war, people die, but it's like, okay, it's not just collateral damage. It's like deliberately slaughtering a lot of innocent people. But yeah, anyway, my point is, okay, that aside, my qualms with the book aside, I would say the important parts, definitely Joshua 1, because it basically sets the stage for what's going to happen, how God appointed Joshua as his next prophet after Moses. And then Joshua 6, because that's the story of Jericho, the famous story of Joshua and the walls of Jericho. I would say those are the most important parts of the book of Joshua. Again, if you're speedrunning the Bible, if you're trying to do highlights only, most important parts of the Bible, I would say those would be the parts of Joshua to read. Yeah, those would be the parts to read, I would say. So like in the previous books, I'm saying like there's so much important stuff, just read the whole thing. And if there gets to like the really boring part, like temple curtains or whatever, just skim through that. Whereas in Joshua, I would just straight up say Joshua 1 and 6 are the most important parts that you should read. Again, I'm not trying to discourage anyone from reading the entire Bible, but I'm just saying if you're trying to read the important parts, the most important parts, those are, in my opinion, what they would be. So the next is Judges. I would say the whole book of Judges is pretty important, pretty entertaining. It goes through the main narrative of much of the Old Testament, which is kind of like the hard men create good times, weak men create tough times, like sort of like people disobey God, then they suffer hardship, then they repent, God comes back to them, rinse and repeat. There's also a lot of interesting stories in Judges, especially the story of Samson. I would say that's one of the most entertaining things in the entire Bible. I really wish they would make like a hard R movie adaptation of Samson. I think it would be kind of awesome. But yeah, I would say Judges. Yeah, read the whole thing, definitely. Next is Book of Ruth. I would say read it. It's short. It's it's an interesting story. It's not like the most vital thing, but I think it's short and it holds your attention. And I guess it's a nice story of friendship. And it's one of the few female centric books of the Bible, so that's an interesting aspect. So I would say definitely yes, read Ruth. Book of Samuel, Samuel 1 and 2, definitely just read all of it. It's the story of King David. It's very important. I'd recommend the show House of David too. It's not the most biblically accurate, but it's entertaining. But yeah, I mean, this is definitely the most like Game of Thrones-ish part of the Bible so far, and definitely like a lot of intrigue, a lot of backstabbing, a lot of battles, a lot of stuff like that. Like it's definitely an entertaining read. I would say yes, and it's important too in setting up the lineage that led to Christ and like King David's importance in, the state of Israel at the time. Not related to the modern day state of Israel. Enough about that. But yeah, definitely read that in its entirety. First Kings, I would say yes in its entirety. Second Kings, I would say in Second Kings, definitely chapters 1 to 13, which is the parts about Elijah and Elisha. We have Elijah at home, Elisha. But basically, yeah, those would be the important parts, and also the very end of Second Kings. So that would be chapters 24 to 25, which covers the expulsion of the Jews from Israel and Judah. Okay, it's a bit confusing. There's like Israel and Judah, and some are expelled, I think, to it's so confusing because there's like Assyria and Babylon. I forget exactly, but it was like basically the expulsion of Jews from what is today Israel to what is today Iraq and Iran. Because there's the Assyrians, Babylonians, and Persians, and they kind of come after one another, but they're all involved in ruling over the Jews during this period of expulsion. But yeah, basically this goes into it. So yeah, those would be the parts of Second Kings I would say are important. First Kings, definitely read the whole thing. Second Kings, I would say the most important parts are 1 to 13 and then 24 to 25. After Kings, there's Chronicles. Gonna be honest, I found First and Second Chronicles a bit of a chore to get through. It was kind of boring. Quite boring at times. And also a lot of it kind of had this like clip show vibes. Like I'm reading Bible stories that I already read in the Book of Kings. So like kind of like reruns or clip show or what have you. So it's like, but I would say actually in Second Chronicles chapter 18, there was the account of the story of King Ahab, which is restated from the Book of Kings. And I thought it was a pretty interesting story and kind of shows like, it's kind of an interesting parable, like, well, not really a parable because it's something that happens in the Bible, but like a story of like how trying to be deceptive and trying to screw over somebody else ends up backfiring on you. So it's an interesting, like moral, like kind of morality based story. And I thought it might have actually been slightly better told in Chronicles than in Kings. It was the only time I really felt that way. So I would say, yes, Second Chronicles 18, which contains the story of King Ahab. I'd recommend that. But otherwise, I'd say the Book of Chronicles would be like Chronicles 1 and 2 would be a part that like I would not call one of the more important parts of the Bible. There's actually one verse somewhere in Chronicles. It was just totally an aside, but it was just about one guy, and it's sort of like, it was literally one verse, just very simple, like he walked with the Lord and something like that. But I found it kind of moving. Like it was very simple, very short, but I don't remember the exact verse. But finding it would be kind of like finding a needle in a haystack. But nonetheless, I think Chronicles as a whole, I would not call it one of the more important books. But yeah. Ezra and Nehemiah, I think there's some disagreement of these. Some people consider these like quite important, but I would say like they're basically about the Jews returning to Israel and rebuilding the temple and stuff like that. I don't know. I would say personally, I did not find Ezra or Nehemiah to be some of the more important books, but I would say some people would strongly disagree there. So I guess, yeah, take that for what it's worth. Next is the Book of Esther. And I also read the Catholic parts in this, which actually, the funny thing is the Book of Esther, the Protestant version, is the only book that doesn't mention God at all, but the Catholic parts do, which I find interesting. Yes, definitely read the Book of Esther. It's an interesting story. Yeah, it's a fascinating story. It's, not overly long. It's quite entertaining. So I would say yes, definitely read the Book of Esther. Next we get into the Book of Job. Yes, definitely read this. It's very important philosophically. It's actually the only book of the Old Testament that actually gives a lot of airtime to opposing views, like Job at times kind of rebukes God and questions God. And it's the only book really in the Old Testament that gives airtime to like the opposing view. Like, it's sort of like a philosophical dialogue back and forth. Almost like, something from like the ancient Greek philosophers, like Socratic dialogue or something of that sort, like from one of the ancient Greeks, basically. Just sort of like the back and forth element to it. Like a little bit like something in like Plato's Republic or something of the sort. So like, yeah, the back and forth philosophical debate element, it's quite interesting. And just the story of Job, it's a very interesting meditation on suffering and redemption. And at the same time, it's like, yeah, it can be a bit repetitive, but honestly, it's definitely worth it. Like it's very important on a philosophical and theological level. So you absolutely read the Book of Job. Next is Psalms. Read it. It's so important to the just prayer and hymns and everything. It's just like the language of Christianity. Like you really feel in reading Psalms that like this is Christianity pure and distilled. Like definitely just read Psalms in its entirety. It's the longest book, but yes, read it all. Absolutely. Next is Proverbs. Again, wholeheartedly read it. The whole thing. Like it's very important on a philosophical level. A lot of it, even for non-Christians, like even for just like atheists, is just really good philosophical advice and meditations on life and what's important. And yeah, it's just very important book, very good book, like philosophically. Even I've been looking at this website, Skeptics Annotated Bible, and even they, like, it's like an atheist website that's like critiquing the Bible, and even they begrudgingly admit like, oh, there's probably more good than bad in Proverbs overall. And although it's not their favorite book is what comes next, and this is an interesting one to talk about. Ecclesiastes. Now, Ecclesiastes is interesting because I find it's the favorite book of the Bible of skeptics, atheists, non-believers, and people who are kind of like iffy on Christianity. It seems to always be their favorite book. Like unironically favorite, because it's like, it's just a really good work of philosophy on its own, like even divorced from the biblical context. And it has a lot of like sayings come from the book of Ecclesiastes that I did, like nothing is new under the sun. There's so many of sayings in this book, like that sayings that originated from the book of Ecclesiastes that I wasn't aware came from there. But yeah, it's just, I think it is a great book. It definitely is. And Yeah, even if like having Ecclesiastes as your favorite book of the Bible might indicate that you're not actually a Christian. So, I mean, I'm not saying a Christian can't have Ecclesiastes as their favorite book, but I'm saying it seems to be every non-Christian's favorite book because it just has so much philosophical value that even like transcends Christianity or religion. And just a lot of like meditations. It's kind of like basically, yeah, proto existentialism, kind of like meditations on what's the purpose of life? Like, is this all for nothing? Is everything just meaningless? Why do we toil away? Why do we do any of this? And Skeptics Annotated Bible, even they admitted, they said, yeah, Ecclesiastes is overall a very good book of the Bible, even though the people who made this website are very much anti-Christian, anti-religion. They admitted, like, yeah, they said themselves, they said this is by far the best book of the Bible. But they also said that they think that it contradicts like almost every other part of the Bible except for possibly Proverbs. Yeah, like they strongly feel that way about it. But yeah, definitely read Ecclesiastes, no question about it. Okay, next is Song of Solomon. Now this is a controversial book. It's actually one of the few books that might be more controversial among Christians than among like atheists, in the sense that like Christians might actually at times criticize it more than the atheists would. Because it has a lot of like sexual innuendo. Honestly, I would say this is not one of the books of the Bible that I would call more important. A lot of Christians seem to agree on that. I think the Mormons eliminated it from their Bible entirely, and I feel like there has been debate even among like actual Christians, like not Mormons, but actual Christians. I think there has been some debate over whether this book truly belongs in the Bible. I would just say, I don't know. Like, how do I say this without being sacrilegious or blasphemous? I mean, at times it read like kind of a Harlequin romance novel. That's just my feelings. Like I am sorry if I've sinned by saying that, but that is how I felt reading it. And I understand like it's a metaphor for how God feels about humanity, but like I don't know. It's definitely not one of my favorite books. Like I did get a little bit like Twilight vibes from it. Isaiah's next. Now Isaiah is another one kind of like Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, where it's like there's a lot of very important stuff in this book, but there's also some parts that are kind of boring and repetitive. Not about like temple curtains or anything like that, but more like repetitive stuff about how the Jews have sinned against God and God will smite them, but God will leave a remnant who will survive and who will go on. There's a lot of stuff about that. Not just in Isaiah, but in other books that come after it. I would nonetheless say read Isaiah in its entirety because there's just the important stuff is very important and it's kind of sprinkled throughout. Like I think the most important parts are Isaiah 7 to 11 and maybe 52 to 54. But I'm playing with fire here because like there could be some very important stuff in other books also. I really don't have time to parse through it to that extent. I would just say read all of Isaiah. I would say read all of Isaiah, but I would especially say read chapters 7 to 11 and 52 to 54. I know those are the parts that are very important, but I feel like there might be some very important stuff in the rest of Isaiah also. Yeah. Jeremiah as a whole, it restates a lot of the stuff in Isaiah. Like there's a lot of repetition in this general section of the Bible, the major and minor prophets. So I would personally, in my opinion, not put Jeremiah among what I would call the more important books. It has some narrative about Jeremiah. It's kind of entertaining, but not one of the like the most entertaining Bible stories. I don't know. I would personally not put Jeremiah among what I would call the most important books or most important sections. Ditto for Ezekiel, but I would say like even like less so for Ezekiel, because Jeremiah at least has narrative. Ezekiel, I don't think really has narrative at all. Yeah, so I would not put Ezekiel among the most important sections, and it's quite long too. Rather tedious, I would say. Did I forget Lamentations? I think Lamentations is before Ezekiel. That's Lamentations of Jeremiah. Yeah, I would say Lamentations would also not be one that I would consider one of the most important. So yeah. Then the book of Daniel, definitely yes, read Daniel. It's quite entertaining, quite an important Bible story. It's referenced in a lot of media, like say The Matrix, Nebuchadnezzar, and VeggieTales, of course. The bunny, oh, I love the bunny. I don't love my mom or my dad, just the bunny. They actually censored that in the DVD version, funny enough. But yeah, yes, read the book of Daniel. I read the Catholic parts too. I thought they were pretty good too, and some good stories there, definitely. Especially like Susanna, the story of Susanna, which is in the Catholic part, I really liked. It's kind of funny too. It actually reminded me a bit of Shakespeare. It reminded me a bit of like one of Shakespeare's comedies, kind of. Yeah, the story of Susanna, definitely I'd recommend that. But I recommend the book of Daniel as a whole. Definitely read this. And same with the story of the dragon in the Bell and the dragon in the Catholic part too. But also, of course, the main stories in the Protestant part, like Daniel in the lion's den, and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or Rakshak and Benny as they're called in VeggieTales. Definitely, yes, Daniel. Wholeheartedly, yeah, absolutely read this. Now, moving on to the final part of the Old Testament, the minor prophets. Yeah, I would say, honestly, these ones would not be mostly ones that I would consider the most important. I'll list the exceptions, though. Absolutely, the book of Jonah. Read the book of Jonah for sure. It's short, it's entertaining, it's a fun story. It's, great story. Read the book of Jonah for sure. Iconic story. Absolutely. Micah 5 is important because there's a prophecy that pertains to Jesus. So I would definitely say read Micah chapter 5. Read Haggai chapter 2 because there's a good parable in there regarding the contaminated garment. It's a really good parable, really good metaphor. And then finally, Zechariah, and not Zephaniah, because it's easy to confuse them. There's Zephaniah and Zechariah. So I'm talking about Zechariah, or some call it Zechariah. Like some have the E, some have the A. But either way, yes, read the book of Zechariah in its entirety, definitely. It's important. There's a lot of important prophecy, a lot of important stuff in there. So I would say, yes, out of the minor prophets, as I said, book of Jonah in its entirety, Micah chapter 5, Haggai chapter 2, and Zechariah in its entirety. Those would be the ones that I would say are the most important out of the minor prophets. A lot of the rest of it is it's just very repetitive, and it's repeating a lot of the same types of things that were in the major prophets, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. Not so much Daniel, because Daniel's more narrative based, but yes. A lot of similar kind of prophecy, a lot of similar message, like the Jews have been bad, God condemned them, but there'll be a remnant who will be restored to the kingdom of Israel. They've gone a whoring for their idols, their Baals, and their Asherah poles, and a lot of that. Yes, there's a lot of stuff in the Bible that is quite repetitive in that regard. And I think especially if you read the book of Isaiah in its entirety, I think you got the idea about a lot of this stuff. And there's a lot of restating in the rest of the prophets of that sort of thing. So yeah, I guess that's my opinion on the Old Testament. And again, now once I read the New Testament, will it put any stuff in the Old Testament into a different perspective? Maybe, maybe not. But from what I've gathered, I would say those are the important parts of the Old Testament, the parts that absolutely you should definitely read. So, in my not so professional opinion, that's what my opinion is about that.